That was the night I left drugs altogether. My name is Matt, and at 21 I thought I understood the world. How wrong was I? My friend had secured some Indian psychedelics that sages took to get closer to God. I had my own shit to deal with, so anything that could get me to God was going in. The trip began as any other, with a vibrant tapestry of colors and the dissolution of the physical boundaries that confined my consciousness. But this time, there was a shift, a dark undertow that pulled me towards something inexplicable. I found myself standing before a mirror, the glass no longer a mere reflector of reality, but a gateway to a realm I wish I had never discovered. As I peered into the mirror, the first wave of horror hit me. A woman's face, twisted in agony, emerged from the depths. Her eyes, filled with an eternal despair, locked into mine, and I heard her voice reverberating through my very soul.
Help me,
she pleaded, her hands banging against the glass, creating ripples as if the mirror was the surface of a disturbed pond. I stumbled back, my heart racing, yet I could not tear my gaze away. The room around me darkened, and the mirror began to show more than just my own reflection. A child, no older than 6, appeared beside the woman, his face contorted into a silent scream as he fell, over and over, never reaching the ground but perpetually caught in a loop of terror. I could almost hear the sound of his fall, a whisper of air that chilled my spine. "Who are you?" I managed to utter, my voice trembling.
"We are the trapped,"
the woman replied, her voice a melodic sorrow that tugged at the edges of my consciousness.
"Bound to relive our horrors, unable to find peace."
I wanted to run, to escape the mirror's ghastly visions, but something held me in place, a morbid fascination, a need to understand. The mirror's surface rippled again, and a new horror took shape. A man, his body emaciated, chains wrapped around his limbs, dragging himself toward me. His eyes were hollows of despair, and with each movement, the chains tore into his flesh, leaving trails of ethereal blood. "Free us!" he rasped, his voice a cacophony of pain and pleading. I recoiled, my mind reeling from the onslaught of their tortured existences. The air suddenly grew colder, a frigid embrace that felt like the touch of death itself. "Why me?" I whispered, my voice lost in the growing tempest of their despair.
"You see us. You can free us."
But how could I? "It's a crazy trip, yo." I started laughing, and suddenly the mirror's surface calmed to show my own reflection once more. I woke up the next day in a dilapidated structure where the boys from around the town came to get high. Before me was the same mirror from the trip. The memories of the night suddenly clawed at the edges of my consciousness. It all felt like a bad dream, a figment of my imagination spurred by the psychedelic trip. Yet, the echoes of their pleas lingered, a constant reminder of the horrors I had witnessed. I spent the day in a daze, unable to shake the feeling that what I had experienced was more than just a hallucination. It was a call, a duty that I had been too afraid to accept. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows that danced like specters across my room, I knew I could not ignore their cries any longer. I had to return to the mirror, to face the darkness, and to find a way to free the souls trapped within. But nothing could have prepared me for the truth that awaited me, a revelation that would forever change my understanding of the world and my place within it. That evening, I got high for the last time. With a resolve that felt both alien and integral to my being, I approached the mirror again. The room dimmed as if the light itself was hesitant to witness what was to come. My reflection stared back at me, a specter of the boy who had unknowingly crossed into the realm of the damned. I reached out, my fingers grazing the cold grass, half expecting to be pulled into the abyss. Instead, the surface rippled, and the woman appeared once more, her expression one of solemn gratitude.
"You came back,"
she whispered. I want to help you, but I don't know how."
"The items,"
she said, her voice clearer now, as if my acknowledgement had given her strength.
A lighter, a pack of salt, and a candle. They're the keys.
Her instructions were cryptic, yet they resonated with a truth I couldn't deny. I looked down and saw a bag in my hand, with a lighter, a pack of salt, and a candle. Crazily, I did not even remember buying it. The woman guided me, her voice a beacon in the encroaching darkness. I placed the candle before the mirror, encircled it with salt, but just as I was about to light it up, I stopped. I don't know what it was, but I felt a pull that just said that something wasn't right. I was still tripping. The world was spinning around my body. My body temperature shot up all of a sudden, and I was seeing colors that I didn't even know existed. And then I saw her eyes, ripe with anticipation.
Light it. Set me free. Set us free.
But I couldn't. Something was pulling me away.
Set us free.
She uttered again. My hands trembled.
Set us free.
This time she yelled, impatient as ever, and I moved back instinctively. That is when she roared. Her lips parted to reveal an array of pincer-like sharp teeth, with her gum protruding out. The child emerged as well behind her, his eyes black as space and skin pale. And then the man arrived, his skin decaying and peeling off, hanging off his bones. She wailed, the child cried, the man wailed, and at that moment, I was as scared as I ever could be. Strange shapes were forming around me, mirrors appearing and disappearing, geometrical patterns appearing out of thin air. The floor underneath my feet started trembling as their cries echoed. I felt the whole house shaking, and then, just as the woman banging on the mirror wall, I collapsed, blackness surrounding my eyes. When I woke up, the room was bright, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like a fog at dawn. I stared at my reflection in that dirty mirror before me, still feeling goosebumps, searching for any sign of the horrors I had witnessed. But there was only me, my eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. I blamed it on the psychedelics. Whatever the trip was, it was just too bloody real. In the days that followed, I convinced myself it had been nothing more than a hallucination, a bad trip induced by the psychedelic. Yet, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling of something profound and terrifyingly real. It wasn't until I stumbled upon an old dust-covered journal hidden beneath the floorboards of my room that I understood the true magnitude of what had transpired. The journal belonged to the previous occupant, a young woman who had dabbled in the occult. She spoke of the mirror, a family heirloom, and its power to trap the souls of the dead, binding them to relive their torments. There was a picture of her husband and child as well. What I saw that night wasn't a hallucination. It started as an adventure, a weekend escape to a cabin nestled within the heart of the forest, surrounded by the allure of untouched nature. My friend Susan had suggested we try something new, something to break the monotony of our daily routines. That something new was a psychedelic known for unlocking the deeper chambers of the mind. We were seeking enlightenment, or perhaps just a story to tell. How naively we danced into the jaws of an unfathomable nightmare. The first hit began innocuously enough. Laughter filled the cabin as the walls seemed to breathe and colors danced in vibrant arrays. It was magical, transcendent, until the night crept in, bringing with it a palpable sense of dread.
Susan, do you feel that?
I remember asking, my voice trembling as the joyful atmosphere soured.
It's just the trip, Sylvia. Let it flow.
She responded, her voice a soothing balm to my rising panic. But then, I saw some shadows twisting, converging into shapes that defied the natural laws of light, and among them emerged a figure with piercing blue eyes, eyes that seemed to penetrate the very essence of my being. It was then that the laughter died, replaced by a silence so heavy it threatened to smother us. The forest demon, as I heard a sound call to me, was a figure born of the darkest ink of night. It whispered promises of despair and taunted me with visions of my deepest fears. Falling into a black void with no end, stuck in a coffin lowered into the ground with no breath left, then surrounded by spiders and rats which feasted on my body while my hands were chained, and then witnessing the forest demon charging at me. Each loop reset with slight variations, a nightmarish Groundhog Day with the stakes of our sanity.
Worst trip ever,
Susan said, and I remembered that thankfully I was just tripping bad. There was no shadow or forest demon, but I lapsed again into more scenarios. In one iteration, the demon chased me and my friend through the forest, its footsteps echoing our frantic heartbeats. Trees turned into grotesque figures, their branches reaching out to snatch at us, tearing at our clothes and skin. We'd stumbled into the cabin, believing ourselves safe, only for the door to burst open as Susan screamed for me to help her.
Sylvia, please, you have to save me from it.
Susan's pleas would pierce the chaos, her figure being dragged away into the darkness by the blue-eyed horror. Each time I tried to save her, the scene would reset, plunging me back into the start of the nightmare. With each loop, the cabin grew more dilapidated, the forest more sinister, and the demon's grip on our reality tighter. Desperation set in as I fought to break the cycle, to save us both from an eternal damnation. The variations of the loop brought new horrors. In one, I saw Susan running alongside me, scared just like me. She urged me to hold her hand, but as soon as I did that, she stopped me with an unnatural force and came to a halt. That is when a sly smile crept up on her face, and her eyes suddenly turned blue. I tried to pull away, but she just kept smiling, and then, without warning, she groaned in a hoarse, unnatural voice. Within moments, she transformed into the forest monster, a dark being that chilled me to my bones. I suddenly felt my blood draining and I started losing consciousness. That is when suddenly, out of nowhere, a big stone flew in the air and smacked the demon in the face. It left my hand and turned to the source.
Leave my friend alone,
I heard momentarily before losing consciousness. In another scenario, I saw Susan talking to the stairs, laughing about the abstract shapes that she was seeing and how hungry she was feeling. Suddenly, everything felt normal again. I returned to my senses. I could finally breathe clearly, felt my blood pressure return to normal, felt alive.
This was the worst trip, ever.
I mumbled. She laughed.
Where did you even get these from? This guy? Which guy? This guy who grows shrooms in the graveyard behind my house.
She laughed again.
What the hell, Suze?
I managed to speak.
What did you see? A lot of shit. What shit? There were all these images, scenery about my worst fears ever. And in every scene, you were there saying, "Help me."
I stood shocked. How did she know?
"Help me."
She reiterated.
"You have to help me."
She repeated, her voice heavier.
"Save me."
Her voice started growing heavier and manly with each moment.
"Help me!"
She screamed in a manly voice, and suddenly her blue eyes were back and everything around me crumbled. All of it was still a trip. And then the scenarios of horrors began again. Through each iteration, one constant remained: Susan's plea for help against the backdrop of those haunting blue eyes. It became my anchor, the focal point of my resolve. I had to save her. I had to break the cycle. As the loops continued, a chilling realization dawned on me. Each scenario, no matter how twisted or surreal, carried a kernel of truth, a reflection of our innermost selves that we have tried to bury. The psychedelic hadn't just opened the door to our minds, it had shattered it, leaving us exposed to the elements of our psyche we weren't prepared to face. Then, without warning, the cycle halted. The abrupt end to the cycle was as disorienting as the loops themselves. I found myself lying in a sterile hospital room, the beeping of machines filling the space where the forest's eerie silence had once resigned. The psychedelic journey that had promised enlightenment had instead delivered me to the brink of madness, and from there, into a coma that had lasted a month. As I regained consciousness, fragments of the nightmare clung to me, the demon's blue eyes, the most vivid of all. The relief of waking was palpable, a stark contrast to the terror that had enveloped me in that endless loop. Yet, as the fog of sleep and drugs lifted, a hollow feeling settled in my chest.
Susan?
I croaked, my voice barely a whisper, the first word I had spoke after coming back to the living. The nurse who had been adjusting the IV paused and looked at me with a mixture of relief and sorrow.
You're awake. We weren't sure when or if you'd come out of it,
she said softly, offering me a gentle smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was something there, a shadow of something unsaid.
Where's Susan?
I pressed, the urgency in my voice fueling a growing sense of dread. The nurse hesitated, her expression shifting to one of discomfort. It was a moment before she spoke, her voice laden with the weight of words she wished she didn't have to say.
Susan, she didn't make it.
She finally admitted, her eyes dropping to avoid mine.
I'm so sorry. She passed away the day you both were found.
The news hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. The loops, the demon, Susan's pleas for help. It all crashed down on me with a newfound brutal reality. Guilt, sharp and merciless, clawed its way through me. Had I been trapped in a loop of my own making, unable to save her even once? But it was the nurse's next words that chilled me to the bone, words that would haunt me forever.
It was the strangest thing. When they found her eyes, they were completely blue.